I'm going to introduce you to three of our speakers that will present. The first one is Matt DiBona. So as a New England district biologist for the National Wild Turkey Federation, Matt DiBona works to deliver habitat projects that benefit the wild turkey and other wildlife through partnerships and collaboration. Prior to joining NWTF in December 2015, he was the waterfowl and upland game bird biologist for Delaware Fish and Wildlife for 8 years. He has a MS in wildlife ecology from the University of Delaware and resides in Belchertown, Mass. with his wife and 2 daughters. In his free time, he enjoys hunting, fishing, hiking, birding, and tabletop games. So we also have Todd Waldron, who's the Northeast Forest Conservation Director with the Ruffed Grouse Society and the American Woodcock Society. He is responsible for conservation delivery and partnerships across New York and New England. Todd has been a member of SAF since 1995 and has worked across a variety of forestry roles during his career. He holds a master's in natural resources from Virginia Tech Center for Leadership in Global Sustainability. And last but not by no means least, Luke McNally is a partner forester with the Ruffed Grouse Society and Vermont NRCS. He works primarily on private lands restoration and habitat enhancement, assisting landowners with all phases of project implementation. Luke also serves on the board of directors for the Lake Champlain chapter of Trout Unlimited and the Boquet River Association. In his spare time, Luke enjoys guiding hunters in pursuit of grouse and woodcock. All right, with that, I'll turn it over to you three.
Thanks, Caitlin. I think maybe we'd work easier for us by splitting up our presentation, but I think we made you a small dissertation for reading our bios there, so sorry. Good afternoon, my name is Matt DiBona. As I said, I'm with the National Wild Turkey Federation. Has anybody heard of the National Wild Turkey Federation? Now I need my camera to take a picture. That's great news. How many people have seen a wild turkey in the last month? Yeah. Now, if we were doing this 50 years ago, right, almost none of you raised your hands. Our wild turkeys were able to come back to New England because our forests came back. And that's why forest management is so important to both of our organizations, really. In the 8 years I've been with the National Wild Turkey Federation, I feel like the forested management landscape has changed, and I sort of mean all the landscapes, natural, social, political. I mean, there's always been folks that have been opposed to cutting trees and how we look at forest management. But as interest in support for addressing climate change has increased, and we're starting to look more seriously at our forests as a natural climate solution, I feel there's just been more tremendous scrutiny around forest management, especially on public lands. You all heard a lot of this from Caitlin this morning. Spoilers. And I think this has been reflected in a lot of our media, right? I think we're seeing it a lot more in stories. Everyone probably remembers this one from National Geographic a couple of years ago, to right here in Vermont with logging on Green Mountain National Forest, right? There's going to be a talk about telephone gap tomorrow. Just an intense scrutiny about how we're making choices to manage our forests. And, you know, I think that's also sort of played out in our policy and regulatory space as well. We're seeing all these new plans, whether it's 30 by 30 initiatives or 50 by 50 initiatives. It seems like in Massachusetts, every year there's 1 or 2 legislative bills to mandate how forests are going to get managed on public lands. Recently there was the Forest Climate Solutions, right, with the moratorium. And while I think having more deliberate discussions about the trade-offs around how we integrate climate forestry into our forest management projects is a good thing, I'm a little concerned maybe that wildlife are going to get left on the side of the road. Because as the conversation has kind of trickled down from the foresters and the land managers, down through the policymakers, and down through the general public, there's been, I think, a tremendous kind of simplification of the discussion, and especially around the messaging, to the point where it's really become like a this or that type conversation, right? Where you can either have clean water or you can have your forest products, right? Or you can have your young forest and your carbon sequestration, or you can have your mature forest and your carbon storage. even the way that we manage for wildlife and our motivations for doing it, I think, are under question, right? If you're making young forest habitat, well, maybe you only really care about growing more game animals so you can shoot them, right? Or maybe, this idea that, well, if we just let our forest grow and mature, it's going to meet all the habitat requirements for all our birds, all our migratory songbirds, all our wildlife. And so, this I don't know, reductionist binary discussion around forest management is really concerning to me, because I feel like through time, there's been some erosion in the social license to do forest management, and that's like the biggest concern for me. Because we're kind of really bad at telling our own story, right? And we've been saying this for years and stuff, and it's not that we're terrible at telling our story. We do a really good job of telling our story to a certain audience that wants to listen to us. We're really bad at breaking through to the 80% of the general public that doesn't really have their mind made up or know what to think about it, right? And they're probably the 80% that maybe matter the most. We've seen the same thing with hunting. And we know our story is complex. When you guys are out in the woods making decisions about how you're going to manage forests, you're doing a lot, right? You're managing probably for multiple objectives, maybe one or two objectives, maybe for 5 or 6. I point this picture out because I think it's really interesting. I don't know if you can see it. There's a little red circle there, and in the background it looks like there's some water. This is from a recent forestry project down in Connecticut. And the water is the drinking water supply for the city of Hartford. And the motivation for this project was not forest products, though it created forest products. It was not wildlife habitat, but it created wildlife habitat. The objective for this project was to increase the structural complexity of the forest to protect water quality, because this property is owned and managed by the Metropolitan District in Connecticut. And their concern is that, we have a relatively homogeneous forest on the landscape. And if the hurricane of 38 happened tomorrow and we had 2,000 acres of trees get knocked down, is there enough of a forest in the understory to hold that soil together and keep it from washing into the drinking water supply of a major city? And so in this effort, in this instance, the primary goal was increasing water quality through active management. And at the same time, they're having all these other benefits, right? They're promoting oak regeneration, which is a big issue in southern New England. They're going to create, this is going to be fantastic wildlife habitat, and it is building towards all these things that, we keep talking about, forest health and resiliency. The message is further complicated by the fact that space and time, right? Forestry time and human time, they don't go well together, right? There's no two ways about it. A fresh wildlife cut does not look good. I don't romanticize it. I can look at it sometimes and think what it's going to look like, but to me this doesn't look very pretty. All of you can have your own opinions on it. But to the average bystander, they have a hard time imagining that in 5 to 10 years it can look something like this. And it becomes a supermarket for wildlife, right? It becomes the place where I want to go bird watching. I want to go hunting, and it has tremendous wildlife benefits. The other thing is this, and this kind of goes back to what Tim said, the power of birds. I kind of like that one. I might steal that one to use down the line. But when Todd and I are managing for projects to do work for the wild turkey or the woodcock or grouse, we're having benefits that extend way beyond that. There's a whole slew of wildlife that benefit from it. There's a saying that we have in our organization, and we kind of toss it around jokingly, but there's honestly a grain of truth in it, is that we've done more for other wildlife by accident than we have for the wild turkey on purpose. And so, it's important to think about all the benefits that we have and the ways to tell the story better. And wildlife is a great way to do that. I talked about space. To some people that live in an area, a 5 to 10 acre patch cut can look like you destroyed their entire forest because they have such a place-based attachment to it. But when you step back and you look at it, you start to see how much diversity that one little activity has. So even if at the site or project level, you're prioritizing 1 or 2 objectives, whether it's for wildlife habitat, whether it's for regeneration, at the landscape, you're really building out that resiliency. You're adding something, a unique feature to that landscape that's going to be heavily utilized by wildlife. And so all that to say, this ideas of forest health and resiliency of wildlife, for us at least, with all the different species that we can help benefit, creates a tremendous sandbox for partnerships. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Todd Waldron with the Ruffed Grouse Society. Todd's someone that I've been fortunate to work with for the last few years, most recently on a partner project or a partnership in Massachusetts that he's going to talk about. Todd?
Thank you, Matt. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. Really excited about talking about ecological forestry and how we ramp that up and how we manage complex relationships surrounding that. And there's one thing I'd like everybody to think about. It's that, you know, as we're thinking about ecological forestry and we're thinking about how do we bring landowners and partners at the scale of 20 million acres over the next few decades to bear on that, it's that wildlife can be a pathway and can bring ecological forestry to life for average landowners. So wildlife, you know, the tracks, the turkeys gobbling, the grouse drumming, the mink tracks along the stream, you know, those are metrics and KPIs for landowners, right? When I was a kid and I was working with my grandparents, cutting firewood on their wood lot over in the Adirondacks, 46 acres, we'd cut about 10 cords a year. We weren't thinking about structural diversity. We were excited about hearing the white-throated sparrows. You know, we were excited about seeing fisher tracks. We were excited about seeing the deer that very seldom came. And so wildlife can bring ecological forestry to life. And so I'd like to just have that as a kind of a theme. And that's where I think, you know, it's what motivates me and excites me to have these conversations. Partnerships are so important. When we're talking about ecological forestry and balancing trade-offs and opportunities, I think we all come to the conclusion that none of us can do this by ourselves, right? We're in New England, so these are wicked problems, right? They're wicked. And, you know, the only way we're going to be able to work on these is through partnerships. And so we started working, this is a partnership I'm really proud of. I'm really proud of our agency partners in Massachusetts for Mass Wildlife and Mass DCR and all the great work that they do. And a couple years ago, probably 2021, 2022, so forth, Mass Wildlife approached us. They approached me and our CEO at Ruffed Grouse Society, Ben Jones, and they said, hey, you know, we know there's value in having partnerships and strong relationships with the conservation community. And we said, yeah, we think so too. And they said, you know, we think there's a lot of common values and goals that we all share. We said, yeah, we think so too. And we think that there needs to be some concerted work around how we talk about this and how we bring people together. So we thought so too. So we started working on this project several years ago. So it kind of formed out of a kind of a think group with Matt at National Wild Turkey Federation, with Mount Grace Land Conservation Trust, Franklin Land Trust, Mass Wildlife, DCR, Ruffed Grouse Society, and some other partners. And it eventually transformed into an opportunity to actually bring this to life. Like, how do we create a space on the landscape and in our communities to think about what does, you know, forest resiliency look like on the ground, and like, how do you actually do that in a place like Massachusetts? How does that look? Like, what are real life examples of how we can work on carbon and climate and biodiversity and wood products and bioeconomy and birding, and like, how do we bring that to the ground? How do we bring that to our landscapes? And so that's what this was all about, was bringing partners together to figure that stuff out and create a space. And operationally, what we had envisioned was 3 landscape level. We're kind of looking at the landscape level here, creating landscapes, priority landscapes, identifying them with partners, And I also just want to give a big shout out to Tim and Audubon. We share so many common values, and we work with Audubon across multiple states, including Massachusetts. And they're great partners, and the work that they're doing with forestry for the birds is so important. And so, broad partnerships, landscape level approaches, and there was also like this longer term planning kit with updating a tool called Biomap, which essentially helps us, we across landscapes we can manage for all this stuff, right? But we still have to do trade-offs on an acre to acre basis and over short periods of time. And so the when and the where's the right thing to do what kind of thing still has to happen in our conversations and in our tools. And so part of this initiative was to update a conservation planning tool, a Biomap in Massachusetts, to help clarify the wheres and the whens. And, right off the bat, I'll say, let me just shift into some perspective here. So one thing we've learned working in Massachusetts over the last couple of years is how quickly things can change. So when we started this project in 2022, that was prior to the Foresters Climate Solutions initiative. That was prior to this administration. There has been tectonic change over the last couple of years with kind of like what we had originally envisioned for like what this project might look like. But that also creates an opportunity for adaptive leadership and thinking through like pivoting, being able to be flexible with partners, being able to align with priorities, being able to weave in the relevancy of wildlife and biodiversity, and like being able to like work on exciting initiatives like the biodiversity initiative right now that Commissioner O'Shea just announced. Looking at climate solutions and looking at the overlaps of all the opportunities with incentivizing private landowners, just a ton of opportunity. But a lot of challenges too, and there's been times where it's like, wow, I should just go to Maine and get a lot more habitat projects done. But we are, totally committed and excited about Massachusetts, because the thing is this isn't just Massachusetts. This is a conversation that's very broader about what our relationship is, right, to our landscapes. Like this conversation that we're having about our consumption and about how we work with landscapes and what we set aside and what we manage as working lands. These are broader conversations, right? And so this isn't just Massachusetts. This is like entirely relevant to every single landscape conversation we have across the Northeast and like how we move forward. Bringing people together is a common theme. Back, in October of 2022, we helped the Mass Wildlife put together a panel. Ali Kasiba was on it talking about climate change and forest management. Paul Catanzaro talking about restoring old growth characteristics. Laura Marks from the Nature Conservancy and Mariko from the Forest Service, Mariko Yamasaki, talking about wildlife silviculture. And so we recognized that like there's a space for all of this and a need, and like, in order for us to navigate in a complex environment, that there's alignment with all of this stuff, right? Like we can't be out there just talking about young forests in a bubble, and how that relates to broader biodiversity. So, this is something that we learned in the partnership, was that we have to tee up and align with kind of like the broader policy initiatives and priorities and concerns that communities are having, and kind of like decision makers. Like we have to be relevant. That bus is going, we can be on it or not really. We want to be on it. We think it's important. And so, forestry tours, like Matt was talking about, like explaining what we're doing on the ground. Here's an example of, forestry tour we did last year in the southern county Berkshires. I don't know, there's probably 50 people that came. It was a great tour. It was a good day in the woods. Here's another example, getting people out, talking about this stuff, weaving the commonalities and the connections. And so, the challenge is, an opportunity is 89% Massachusetts, if you look at National Woodlands Association survey, people love wildlife, right? That's what brings this stuff to life. But there's still a lot of, concern and tension and misunderstandings around perceptions around where sustainable forestry fits or might fit into our toolkits. And we want diverse toolkits, right? We're dealing with unprecedented challenges around biodiversity and nature and climate, and they're all related. And so we absolutely know in this room that forestry has a place in our conservation toolkit. And so we just have to continue to tell those stories. And, I'll pass this off to my colleague, Luke McNally, but before I do, I'll say one more thing is what Mike Snyder said this morning about how we show up really resonated with me. There's a great book called Breaking Through Gridlock by Jay Grant, and it's a college book I had to work in on my sustainability program when I was in school. And, it talks about conversations, moving conversations beyond one-dimensional combos. And, the starting point is with ourselves, right? The conversations we have with ourselves. And that works good for me because I talk to myself a lot, right? So I'm driving down the road, my hands are going, and what are you doing? I'm working on ecological forestry. So with that, I'll pass it along to Luke, and thank you.
Thanks, Todd. Earlier this week, I told Matt and Todd that we should wear sport coats for this presentation because nobody else would be wearing sport coats and it would make us seem smart. And then I realized this morning that I hadn't taken mine to the dry cleaner, so sorry, guys. I'm going to discuss social license and messaging. We're having a global conversation about sustainability, and everyone in this group is familiar with the Leopold quote about heat coming from the furnace and food coming from the grocery. And I think we can really capitalize and assert better that wood is the premier natural resource. Another great quote is, if it doesn't come from a farm, it comes from a mine. And I think about that over and over and over again. It sort of lumps forestry in with farming. But, these are examples of phrasing, of catchphrases, right, that we can use to take a complex idea and turn it into a simple T-shirt or a bumper sticker. And we can use these catchphrases to help reinforce an ethos about another catchphrase, wool, wood, and leather. Like when I was in school, they told us about, how back in the day the foresters used to just have stuff made out of wool, wood, and leather before Gore-Tex, and I thought, what a novel idea. I want to go back to those days. So, these catchphrases, they're a little gimmicky, right? I think they can be, at least. My father is an English teacher, and he told me to, at all costs, avoid these cliches and these truisms, and I almost disagree. I think when we're talking to the public, we need to come up with some sort of way to bundle it in a small package. And as dorky and nerdy as some of these catchphrases and phrasing can be, I think they can be really effective, especially when we're trying to counter a catchphrase, which is just don't cut trees. So the public needs to hear these analogies, right? And so, in paying homage to my father here, the English teacher, it's coming full circle here. It's metaphors, right? We're using metaphors to explain things to people, and I'm confident that the public is pretty intelligent, and they will get it if we can use the right metaphors to put this in front of them and say yes to wood, and say no to plastic and steel and concrete. Guerrilla marketing is another concept that I just love the idea of. Guerrilla tree planting is really fun too, but that's an aside. Guerrilla marketing I have to attribute to Charlie Hancock. He threw this out in a meeting one time. I think it's something that we could mobilize and discuss as a group, how to get our messaging out there in the media a little bit better. These are the most basic examples of wood products, right? It doesn't take much imagination to get here, but I think this is where we start that conversation, and we can move into other forest products that people don't necessarily think of as front of mind. And, just really hammer on the fact that, do you want these products to come from the Amazon rainforest or the Pacific Northwest, or can we take responsibility for our own material possessions? People make decisions based on values, not science. So storytelling will beat scientific citation every single time. And I think we're always citing the science and saying like the science as a phrase, and I think it's getting overused and it's kind of turning into sustainability and resiliency as far as we don't even know what that means anymore necessarily. So we need to build a new story, and the new story is exactly the same as the old story insofar as, hunting deer and harvesting wood, right? This is Vermont, this is what we've done for the past several hundred years, but the new story is that modern humans should do their best to live close to the land, and that includes interacting directly with wildlife through hunting and fishing and using naturally sourced materials, and that wood is a big part of natural material culture alongside things such as wool and leather. That new story is gritty, it's authentic, right? It's people eating deer and building barns out of local wood. This is Vermont, right? Everybody's got a red and black Mackinac. I think we need to meet criticism head on. We need to say, absolutely, yes, heavy equipment in the forest causes some sediment transport. Roads and trails alter hill slope hydrology. It's the truth. We just need to say it, and then we don't sound like ostriches with our head in the sand about sediment and erosion. However, public roads and infrastructure, they also alter hill slope hydrology. Ski resorts and mountain bike trails alter hill slope hydrology. Farming alters hill slope hydrology. So somehow only logging has taken the heat for it, which is very interesting and hard to explain how we got there. But really, this is a problem that we need to talk about more, not less, right? It's all about education. This is a problem that can only be helped through education. Finally, we need to push the BMPs. We need to figure out how to pay loggers to control erosion because they can't afford it. It's not a handout, it's a necessity. We need to figure out how to use more low-impact equipment. And right now there's a bill, H-264, in the Vermont legislature to do exactly that. It's called the Forest Management and Climate Resilience Grant Program. So we should all support it. Todd and I and some of our partners have been talking about building a coalition around some of this watershed forestry stuff. For example, in the Catskills, there's an organization called the Watershed Agricultural Council, and this is in addition to NRCS. They have resources, technical assistance, as well as funding to help farmers and logging contractors implement the BMPs. And I think it's a great idea. I think we need to work with our partners, such as the professional logging contractors of the Northeast, the conservation NGOs, such as our own organizations, Lake Champlain Basin Program. We're trying to put together this coalition, NWTF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. We want a coalition to try to build out and rough in what it might look like to have a program like what they have in the Catskills with the Watershed Agricultural Council here in the Champlain Valley. They have a lot more money there because it's New York City's money, but it's what we'd like to work towards. Also want to add, since we're talking about critters here in this session, that, the critters that we've used to get us here so far, the wild turkey, the whitetail, the grouse, the woodcock, etc. I love these critters, right? That's the moniker for which my organization is named. However, there's over 100 species of birds that utilize early successional habitat in the Northeast. There's other species like wood turtles that are really, really cute that we need to elevate, because I think if people don't necessarily identify with a wild turkey, or they don't even know what a woodcock is, but you could put a turtle on a screen. I mean, who doesn't love turtles? They're adorable. So let's be creative about what poster children, whatever we use, to sell this message. I think there's a lot of mileage that we can get out of turtles. Beaver are really popular right now, and just kind of go with the flow. But I want to conclude by saying that we certainly don't have all the answers. We want your input. This should be a discussion, so please tell us what your ideas are about creative marketing, about messaging, about how we can sell wildlife conservation alongside forestry and in partnership and in support of forestry to the public. So here's our contact info, and we'll be around for the rest of the day if you want to chat. Thank you.